You are no longer my Luna, you baron. The kingdom demands an heir.
No! I can't stand the Asian and don't deserve it!
Tirana Gargo! I don't deserve it! Get her!
She ran. Her blue gown, embroidered in gold at the belt and collar, tore against the roots as she pushed through the trees. Mud darkened the hem. Her hair, pale gold, loose, wild now, whipped across her face. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but her eyes were not broken. They were furious. They were alive. Behind her, the wolves came. 3 of them. Grey-coated, eyes lit amber, mouths open and snarling as they thundered through the forest floor. And behind the wolves came the king himself, massive in black battle armor, etched with silver crests, moving with the cold, relentless certainty of a man who had never once lost a chase. His jaw was set. His eyes burned gold. He was hunting her. The same man who, only weeks ago, had stood before his entire court and announced, calmly, proudly, without a flinch, that she was no longer his Luna. Back on the palace steps, framed in warm torchlight, the other woman stood smiling. Dark-haired, radiant in deep crimson, one hand resting softly over her swollen belly. She was not even watching the chase. She had already won. Or so she believed. To understand why Jayna Sterling was running through that forest, muddy, bleeding, and still somehow more powerful than anyone chasing her, you have to go back to where it began. Not to the night she was cast out, but to the night she was chosen. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Because I need to check on you before we go any further. Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. It is essential that we get your support through subscriptions, likes, comments, and shares. So if this story is already pulling at your heart, which I know it is, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Thank you. Now let us get back to the story. The Sterling pack did not whisper about weakness. They declared it. From the outer villages to the carved stone walls of the Great Hall, the expectation had never changed in 3 centuries of rule. The Alpha King must produce a living heir, not a rumor of one, not a promise of one, a breathing, walking, named heir who carried the bloodline forward. That was the law. That was the weight every Luna stepped into the moment she accepted the silver crown. Jayna had accepted it 6 years ago. She was 22 when Jeffrey Sterling chose her. Not the most politically powerful candidate, and not the one the Council of Elders preferred. But Jeffrey had looked at her across a gathering of 30 eligible women and walked straight to her, his eyes certain, and said simply, "You." His voice had carried no performance, just conviction. She had believed that meant something. For 3 years she had been a good Luna, better than good. She managed disputes between pack families before they became feuds. She sat with grieving mothers and with warriors returning from border patrols with wounds they could not name. She reorganized the royal records. She learned the names of every servant in the hall. She poured herself into the Sterling kingdom like water filling every crack, quietly, completely, without ever demanding recognition. But then the 3rd year became the 4th, and the 4th became the 5th, and no child came. But the whispers began the way they always do, softly, between people who claim to mean well. Omegas exchanged glances in the laundry halls. Warriors went quiet when Jayna passed, and Elder Donald Martin, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, had taken to watching her in council meetings with the particular patience of someone waiting for a door to fall off its hinges. "The Sterling line demands continuity," Martin said once, loudly, at a council table Jayna was not invited to attend. She had heard it anyway, standing just outside the carved door. Jeffrey had said nothing in response. That silence cost more than any argument. Cecilia arrived in the 5th year. She did not arrive shouting. She arrived carefully, as a guest of one of the Western Pack allies, polished in burgundy silk, laughing at exactly the right moments, never appearing to try too hard. She was beautiful in the way of women who have studied beauty as a discipline. Dark hair swept back, expression warm but always calculating just behind the warmth. Jayna noticed her on the first evening and felt nothing particular. She had seen women admire Geoffrey before. He was a king. It was expected. She did not notice the specific way Geoffrey's hand rested at the small of Cecilia's back during the second evening's banquet. She told herself she did not notice. By the 6th month, the palace staff noticed for her. Geoffrey and Jayna had not stopped sharing the same chamber. Not officially, but something had changed in the architecture of their nights together. He was still capable of tenderness. There were evenings when he pulled her close in the dark and held her with the same fierce care she remembered from the early years, when loving her had been something he chose, not something he performed. But morning always came, and in the daylight, Geoffrey was increasingly a stranger with a familiar face. She asked him once, directly, standing in their chamber, her hands still, her voice level. "Is there something I should know about, Geoffrey?" He looked at her for a long moment. His expression did not break, but something moved behind his eyes, a decision being made. "There is nothing you need to worry about, Jayna." She should have known then that the answer and the question were not the same thing. The ceremony came on a night in late autumn. The great hall was full. Torches lined the black stone walls, so the Sterling crest, a wolf rearing beneath a crescent moon, hung above the throne in silver-stitched silk. Every elder was present, every senior warrior, every noble family of rank within the Sterling coalition. Jayna had dressed carefully that morning. She had chosen the white gown of the reigning Luna, fitted, regal, trimmed with moonstone clasps at the shoulders. She had pinned her light gold hair and placed the silver circlet at her brow without help, the same way she did every formal occasion. She looked like what she was. She stood in the center of the hall, not yet knowing this night would end her. Geoffrey rose from his throne. The hall went still, the kind of stillness that has weight, that presses against the ribs. He did not look at her. Not at first. He spoke about the pack's future, about strength and continuity and the sacred duty of the bloodline. His voice was controlled, deep, every syllable deliberate. He was good at speeches. He had always been good at commanding a room. Then Cecilia stepped forward from the side of the dais. She wore deep crimson, the color of announced intention. Her belly was visibly round beneath the fabric. She stood beside Geoffrey with the composure of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and was pleased with how it was going. Geoffrey placed his hand over hers. "The Sterling pack will have its heir," he said. "The future of this kingdom has been secured." The hall did not erupt. It absorbed. Some faces were relieved. Some were careful. A few, Robert among them, standing rigid near the far wall, went utterly blank. Only then did Geoffrey look at Jayna. His expression was not cruel. That was almost worse. He looked at her the way someone looks at a responsibility they have finally resolved, sad in a distant, already past way. "Luna Jayna has served this pack with great dedication," he said. "She will be honored in her release." Honored in her release, as if she were livestock being retired. Jayna did not cry. She stood straight, her hands folded in front of her, didn't shake. She kept her face composed with every drop of discipline 6 years of queenhood had built into her spine. She looked at Geoffrey, and he looked away first. She walked out of the great hall herself. No one stopped her. No one spoke. Behind her, Cecilia smiled. The chamber she had shared with Geoffrey for 6 years was stripped of her things by morning, not rudely. The servants were quiet and quick and would not meet her eyes. Her gowns, her books, her small collection of personal letters, all boxed and placed in a lower guest room at the far end of the east wing, a room with no fire lit and no flowers in the vase, and a view of the outer wall rather than the courtyard. That was how quickly a queen could become a guest in her own home. Jayna sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at her hands. They were steady. She was proud of that at least. She had not fallen apart in the hall. She had not begged. She had not made a sound that anyone could use against her. But alone, in that cold room, she let herself feel the full weight of the night. 6 years. 6 years of devotion. 6 years of standing beside a man she had genuinely loved, helping him build something that was supposed to be theirs. And he had stood in front of every person who mattered and told them she was done. There was a knock at dawn. Soft. 3 times, a pattern she recognized. Robert entered without waiting for an answer. He was Geoffrey's beta, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with the sort of face that carried humor quietly, so that when the humor disappeared, you felt the absence sharply. It had disappeared now. He set a wrapped bundle of provisions on the small table, and stood looking at her with an expression that could not decide whether it was anger or sorrow, and had settled into something that was both. "I can arrange transport to the southern border settlement," he said, quietly, before the morning guard changes. "Did Geoffrey send you?" "No." A pause. He would not have. She looked at the bundle. "What does he expect me to do, Robert? Just disappear?" "I think," Robert said carefully, "that he has not thought that far. I think last night was about what he wanted the court to see, not about what happens to you after." That was honest enough to hurt. Jayna stood. She took the bundle. "I am not disappearing. I am leaving on my own terms at my own pace." "That is close enough to the same thing," Robert said. But he nodded. "I will make sure the road is clear." She was gone before the morning ceremony that installed Cecilia officially in the Luna's quarters. She did not look back at the palace. She wanted to. She did not allow herself. Back in the great hall, Cecilia moved through the Sterling rooms, the way water moves into a new container, filling every corner, finding every edge, desettling herself so completely that within a week it was hard to remember the shape the room had before her. She redecorated the Luna's chambers in rich reds and deep golds. She dismissed 3 of Jayna's longtime personal staff without explanation. She hosted a dinner for the Elder Council and made Donald Martin laugh for the first time in recent memory. Geoffrey watched her manage his world and felt, for the first time in a long time, the particular relief of a man who has convinced himself that the simplest answer is the correct one. But something sat wrong beneath the relief. Not guilt, exactly. Not yet. More like a quiet noise in a wall that you keep telling yourself you will investigate later. He did not investigate it. He went back to ruling. He went back to decisions and patrols and border meetings and the 1,000 daily demands of a kingdom. He let the noise sit there and told himself it would fade. It did not fade. A pack without its true Luna does not collapse immediately. It tilts. Small things first. A border dispute between 2 minor families that should have been settled in an afternoon stretched into 3 weeks of bitter argument because no one had the particular patience and steadiness to sit with both parties long enough. Jayna would have resolved it in a single morning. No one noticed the connection. The kitchen staff grew difficult. Petty quarrels multiplied in the lower quarters. 2 senior warriors requested transfers to the Eastern Alliance packs without giving clear reasons. The balance of the house, the social temperature that had been quietly maintained for years, was off. No one could name why. Cecilia noticed the friction and responded to it the way she responded to most obstacles, by applying pressure. She gave sharp orders. She dismissed people who questioned her. She rewarded those who aligned quickly and made examples of those who did not. It was not leadership. It was management by fear. The hall obeyed, but it did not settle. Donald Martin watched all of it with satisfaction, interpreting every small disorder as confirmation that the pack had needed new energy. Strong, fertile, decisive energy. But he had pushed for Jayna's removal longer than Geoffrey ever admitted, and the night of the ceremony had felt, to him, like a long overdue correction. The Luna must embody the future, Martin told Geoffrey at a council session, his voice carrying the smooth authority of a man who never doubted himself. What Cecilia offers is continuation. That is what the Sterling line has always required. Geoffrey nodded. He had been nodding more lately and thinking less. Robert, seated 2 chairs down, said nothing during that exchange. He wrote something in the small leather journal he always carried and turned the page. Later, in the corridor outside the council chamber, he stopped Geoffrey with a hand on the arm. "Has it occurred to you," Robert said, keeping his voice low, "that in the 3 weeks since Jayna left, ought we have had more internal disputes than in the previous year combined?" Geoffrey looked at him. "Transitions create friction. It will settle." "I have been your beta for 8 years," Robert said. "I know what friction looks like, and I know what wrong looks like." "This is wrong." Geoffrey pulled his arm free, gently but with finality. "Let it settle, Robert." Robert let him walk away. He wrote something else in his journal. Meanwhile, Cecilia, alone in the Luna's chambers at night, sat at the edge of the great bed and rested her palm over her belly. The pregnancy was real. That part was true. But there were things about the timeline that required careful management. There were dates she had learned to speak around. There were details she had rehearsed with Donald Martin in 3 private meetings before the ceremony. Or she was very good at details. She had been preparing this particular story for a long time. She told herself it would hold. The lie, however, had its own heartbeat. And hearts, eventually, give things away. 3 hours east of the palace, in a stone cottage flanked by ash trees and climbing ivy, Mrs. Neal lived with the weight of a secret that had made her an old woman long before her years had earned it. She was not a bad person. She had never thought of herself as one. She was a midwife of 30 years, a woman whose hands had guided hundreds of lives into the world and had held the hands of mothers through every kind of grief that birth can bring. She had steady nerves and a practical mind, and she had believed, on the night it happened, that she was doing what the situation required. She had been wrong. She knew that now. She knew it every morning when she woke before light and lay staring at the ceiling. She knew it every time she sat down to eat and could not finish the meal. She knew it in her hands, those capable, careful hands, which had begun to tremble slightly in the last year. Not from age, from remembering. The night had been 5 years ago. A secret labor arranged by Donald Martin and 2 senior palace officials who had come to her with a quiet, very specific request. Jayna was in distress. The delivery was early and complicated, and the child, a boy, small and fierce and breathing, needed to disappear. For the good of the pack, they had told her. The birth could not be registered. The boy could not be declared the Alpha King's heir. Not then. There were political alliances at risk, and as agreements that would collapse if it became known that Jayna had successfully delivered a child. The heir question needed to remain open. The pressure on Geoffrey needed to remain active. It was political machinery, not malice, they insisted. The child would be placed safely. He would be cared for. He would simply not be a prince. Mrs. Neal had taken the money and stayed silent, and told herself it was not the worst choice available in a situation with no clean options. Jayna had been told, in the fog of exhaustion and medication, that the child had not survived. Mrs. Neal had been the one to tell her. She had held Jayna's hand. She had watched Jayna break apart, and then she had gone home and tried to put it somewhere she could live with. It would not stay there. Now Jayna was gone from the palace, cast out publicly, stripped of the only identity she had rebuilt herself into after the loss. And the boy, Carl, was 5 years old, living with a trusted family in the forest settlement, 2 days' ride east, asking questions that were getting harder to answer. He had Geoffrey's jaw, Jayna's eyes. Mrs. Neal had known it from the first moment she saw him at 8 months old, and it had not become easier to look at since. She sat in her cottage that night and wrote the first line of a letter she had started and burned 11 times before. This time, she did not burn it. Jayna had been surviving for 3 weeks on stubbornness and the provisions Robert had packed. She had made it to the border settlement, a scattered collection of small homes and a trading post at the edge of Sterling territory, and found a room above a cooper's workshop for a reasonable price. She told the landlord she was a traveller. He did not press the point. Border settlements attracted people who were leaving something behind, and asking questions was considered poor hospitality. She spent the first week sleeping more than she had in years. Her body, it turned out, had been running on alertness for so long that rest felt foreign. She dreamed of the great hall. She woke in a cold sweat and then lay still and forced herself to breathe until the panic passed. She was not going to fall apart. That was the one firm decision she had made on the road east. She was not going to fall apart. The trouble found her on a Tuesday in the market behind the trading post. 3 men, not Sterling pack. Their bearing was rougher than that. Wahast border freelancers had decided a lone woman traveling without escort was an opportunity rather than a person. They were wrong. Jayna backed against a cart and grabbed the handle of a trader's hammer lying on the nearby table, and she had made her position clear in approximately 4 words when a 5th man stepped between her and the 3. He was very large. That was the first impression. Dark clothing, practical, worn, built for movement and not ceremony. A heavy cloak with the collar up, dark eyes that assessed the situation without urgency, like a man who had seen worse and was only mildly interested in this particular version. "Move along," he said to the 3 men. Just that. 2 words, completely flat, no drama in them. The 3 men moved along. Jayna set the hammer down. "I had it." "You did," the man agreed. "Oh, but now it is done faster." His name was Eugene. He did not offer a family name, and she did not ask for one, not yet. He was known in the border territories as a rogue alpha, one of those wolves who operated outside formal pack alliance, beholden to no king, claiming no sworn territory. In the Sterling Palace, the word rogue was spoken the way you speak of weather that damages crops. A threat, an instability. In person, Eugene was not what that word had prepared her for. He was perceptive in a way polished courtmen rarely were, because courtmen had learned to listen selectively. Eugene listened like someone who could not afford to miss things. Over the following days, he appeared again without being invited and without quite imposing. He brought food to the trading post at the same time she did. He fixed a broken shutter on the Cooper's building without asking credit for it. He was present in the background the way a patient animal is, without pressure, without agenda visible. One evening she asked him directly, "Why are you staying near me?" He thought about that for a moment, with the particular slowness of a man choosing honest words over easy ones. "Because you are clearly more than what you are presenting yourself as. And the border is not safe for women traveling alone, particularly women who smell like sterling silver." She looked at him steadily. "You knew?" "I suspected. I have been to the Sterling Great Hall twice on alliance business. I remember the Luna." A pause. "I remember her being treated considerably better than this." It was the bluntest acknowledgement of her situation she had received from anyone, and somehow that made it easier to breathe. She did not tell him everything. Not yet. But she let herself stop pretending she was no one. That night, for the first time since leaving the palace, she slept without dreaming of the Great Hall. The letter reached Jayna 6 days after Mrs. Neal sent it. It arrived with a border courier who looked relieved to hand it off and leave quickly. The outside bore no return address. Inside, the handwriting was cramped and pressed hard into the paper, like the words had been written under pressure. Jayna read it 3 times. Then she sat very still for a long time. The letter did not say everything. It was careful, abbreviated, the kind of confession that stops just short of the most damaging sentence, as if the writer kept losing courage at the last moment. But it said enough. It said that the night 5 years ago had not ended the way Jayna was told. It said there was a child. It said that a boy of 5 years, called Carl, was living with a family in the forest settlement of Ashwick, 2 days east. And it said that Mrs. Neal was sorry. Just that at the end. 2 small words pressed so hard the pen had nearly torn the paper. Eugene found Jayna outside the cooper's workshop an hour later, sitting on the low stone wall with the letter in her lap, and her face completely quiet in the particular way that means a storm has moved so deep inside a person it has run out of room to show. "Something has happened," he said. She looked up. "My child did not die." He was still. Then he sat down beside her on the wall, not speaking, not filling the space, just present. "I need to get to Ashwick," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were finally shaking. "I need to go now." "Then we go now," he said. Simple. No debate. The ride to Ashwick took 2 days through autumn forest. Copper leaves, cold air, the particular silence of trees that have let everything go for another year. Jayna barely slept. She rode with the letter folded in her pocket and her eyes on the road ahead. Carl was playing in the yard of a modest stone house at the edge of the settlement when they arrived. He was 5 years old, slight and quick, with dark eyes and light hair that was neither Geoffrey's black nor Jayna's full gold, something between the two. He stopped when he saw them and studied them with the frank, unguarded assessment that only young children possess. Jayna could not speak for a moment. No, she stood at the yard fence and looked at him, and felt something shift in her chest that she had no name for, something between recognition and grief, and a love so vast it frightened her. He had her eyes, exactly her eyes, the family who cared for him, a quiet older couple, clearly aware of more than they had been asked to acknowledge, stepped back respectfully. Mrs. Neal had prepared them. They did not interfere. Carl walked to the fence and looked up at Jayna. "Are you her?" he asked. "Who?" Jayna managed. "The lady Mrs. Neal said would come." He considered her. "She said you were important." Jayna crouched down to his level. She reached through the fence slats, and he let her take his small hand without pulling away. "I am," she said, barely above a whisper. "I am very important to you." He seemed to accept this without drama, with the particular trust of a child who has been well loved and therefore believes the world mostly tells the truth. Behind Jayna, Eugene stood quietly at the road. He was looking at the child's face, and he was thinking of Jeffrey Sterling, and he was already calculating what was coming next. He did not share these thoughts out loud. He did not have to. He already knew a storm was on the horizon. Back in the Sterling Palace, things were tightening in the places where things usually begin to crack. Robert had been quietly reviewing palace records for 2 weeks, and the numbers were not adding up. Not dramatically, not obviously. But Robert had been Geoffrey's beta for 8 years, and a meticulous keeper of dates and documents for longer than that. He knew the official record of every birth, death, and significant event within the pack for the past decade. He knew which healers had attended which events. He knew which official seals appeared on which paperwork, and the record of the night 5 years ago, the night Jayna had been taken ill in her 7th month, and the palace had been told there had been a loss, was thin, unusually thin. The attending midwife's report was absent. The healer's log had a gap of 6 hours. The seal on the official notification belonged to Donald Martin's personal register, not the palace physician's. Robert set those papers aside and wrote 3 words in his journal. Something happened here. Meanwhile, Cecilia was becoming reckless in the way of people who have held a lie so long. they begin to confuse it with truth. She dismissed another member of staff, a senior archivist who had served the palace for 20 years, for no stated reason other than that his presence made her uncomfortable. She had begun attending council sessions without invitation and offering opinions on border policy that she had no standing to offer. She pushed Geoffrey toward what she and Donald Martin were calling the binding ceremony, an old tradition that would legally formalize the heir arrangement before the birth, with a sense of urgency that Geoffrey found, in his quieter moments, slightly out of proportion to the calendar. "Why the rush?" he asked her one evening, standing in the chambers she had redone in red. "The child is not due for months." Cecilia smiled. "I want everything settled before the birth. I want nothing in question." She put her hand on his arm and looked up at him with the particular expression she had perfected. Soft, certain, quietly adoring. "Don't you want that too?" "Everything settled. Was everything secure?" Geoffrey covered her hand with his. "Of course," he said. But later, alone, he stood at the window of his study and looked out at the dark courtyard and felt the noise in the wall again, louder now. He thought about Jayna for the first time since the ceremony, not as a problem resolved, but as a person. He thought about the way she had walked out of the great hall, straight, silent, upright. No scene, no crumbling. The dignity in that walk had been the most devastating thing he had seen in years, and he had been determined not to examine why. He was starting to examine it now. Robert appeared at the study door. "My lord, do you have a moment?" Geoffrey looked at him. Something in Robert's face made him straighten. "Close the door," Geoffrey said. Robert laid the documents on Geoffrey's desk without preamble. He walked Geoffrey through each gap, each anomaly, each date that did not match, each signature that had no business being where it was. He spoke quietly and precisely, the way he always spoke when the information was serious enough that performance would only get in the way. Geoffrey listened without interrupting. His face went through several expressions before settling into something that was very still. "You are telling me," Geoffrey said at last, "that the night 5 years ago—" "I am telling you that the records are incomplete in a way that does not happen by accident," Robert said. "I am telling you that Donald Martin's seal appears where the physician's seal should be. I am telling you that there is no attending midwife report for an event that absolutely required one." He paused. "I am not yet telling you what that means, but I am telling you we need to find out what it means." Geoffrey pushed back from the desk. He stood and moved to the window. Outside, the first autumn snow was beginning to fall against the dark stone. "Where is Mrs. Neal now?" he asked. "Her cottage east of the settlement. She is still in the territory." Robert hesitated. "My lord, before you act, you need to understand that if something was hidden, it was hidden with significant cooperation. This was not a small oversight." Geoffrey said nothing. He was thinking about 5 years ago. He was thinking about Jayna, pale and silent in the healer's wing, telling him the child was gone with the terrible composure of someone so deeply in shock that their voice had stopped working correctly. He had held her. He had believed he was grieving alongside her. He had been grieving for a lie. "Don't find Mrs. Neal," Geoffrey said, very quietly. He did not need to say the rest. Robert was already moving. 2 days later, Cecilia discovered that Robert had left the palace without announcement. She went to Donald Martin that same evening. "He is looking," she said, sitting very straight in the chair across from his desk, her pregnancy suddenly feeling less like armor and more like weight. Martin's expression did not change. "Looking implies he knows where. He knows enough to start." She looked at him with the first genuine fear he had seen in her since this began. "Donald, the old woman. She has been writing letters." Martin set down his pen, his jaw tightened by the smallest fraction. How do you know? Because I had the border post watched, 3 letters east in the last month. Cecilia leaned forward. If she confesses, she will not confess, Martin said. But his voice had lost, for the first time, its full weight of certainty. Cecilia looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the door. She already has, Cecilia said, and she left him sitting with that. In Ashwick, Jayna had been with Carl for 3 days. She watched him eat and sleep and run in the yard. She listened to the things he said, the serious questions and the funny observations, and the small, important opinions of a 5-year-old who had no idea how much of the world's history was coiled around him. She didn't tell him everything yet. He was 5. There would be time for truth in the right doses. But she told him she was not leaving. He had looked up at her from his dinner with those clear, dark eyes. Good, he said simply, and went back to his meal. She had to press her lips together to keep from crying. Eugene, who had been sleeping in the loft above the stable and proving himself useful in a dozen quiet ways, found her that evening sitting outside by the fire ring behind the house. He brought 2 cups of something warm and sat down beside her without ceremony. They will come, he said. It was not a question. I know. Jayna wrapped both hands around the cup. Geoffrey will figure it out, or Robert will, which is the same thing. She stared into the fire. I don't know if he is coming to fix it or to control it. Does it change what you do? She thought about that. No. Carl is mine. Whatever Geoffrey decides to do about his pride is his business. Carl is mine, and nothing that happens in that palace changes that. Eugene looked at her in the firelight, and something moved in his expression, respect, and something warmer that he kept contained with the practiced ease of a man who had learned that wanting what you cannot have is a particular kind of exhaustion. You were never just a Luna, he said. You were always a queen. They were just too thick to see it. Jayna looked at him. That is either the most comforting thing anyone has said to me in weeks, or a very smooth line. Both, he said. I am capable of both. She laughed, genuinely, quietly. The first time in a long time. She did not notice, through the trees at the edge of the property, the shape of a rider stopping at the road to look toward the light of the fire. Jayna Sterling had not ridden without a full royal escort in 4 years. He rode now with only Robert and 2 men he trusted absolutely. No banners, no armor markings, but the kind of deliberate plainness that a king only adopts when he does not want to be a king for a while, when he wants to be a man doing something the king in him would have delegated. He had not told Cecilia he was leaving. He had not consulted Donald Martin. He had listened to Robert's account of everything the record suggested, and then he had sat in his study for 3 hours in silence, and then he had gotten up and changed his clothes and said, quietly, We ride. Robert had followed without a word. They found Mrs. Neal on the 2nd day, at her cottage. She answered the door before they knocked, as if she had been expecting them. She looked at Geoffrey with the expression of a woman who has been holding her breath for years, and has finally decided to exhale regardless of the consequences. She told him everything. By standing at her own door, her hands folded in front of her, her voice steady and quiet and exhausted. She told him about the night of the birth. She told him about Donald Martin's instructions, and the money, and the fear, and the political reasoning that had been presented to her as necessity. She told him that she had convinced herself it was for the greater stability of the pack, and that she had known, somewhere behind that reasoning, that it was a lie. She told him that Carl was in Ashwick. She told him that Jayna was with Carl. Geoffrey stood on her doorstep in the grey autumn morning and listened to the full weight of what 5 years of silence had built, and when she finished, he said nothing for a long time. Then, he is alive. Yes, my lord, and Jayna has been with him. For 3 days, I believe. He turned and walked back to his horse and stood with his hand on the saddle and his back to everyone, and Robert did not approach him for several minutes because a man processing 5 years of consequential failure in the space of 60 seconds needs to be left alone with it. When Geoffrey mounted, his face was different. Something that had been hard and self-certain had been quietly removed from it, leaving something raw underneath. They rode for Ashwick. What Geoffrey did not know was that Cecilia, now desperate, had made her own move. She had dispatched 5 palace guards under Donald Martin's informal authority. Not Geoffrey's seal, not official orders, just Martin's word, and the implication that the king would sanction it, with instructions to reach Ashwick and secure the boy. What she needed Carl either discredited or gone before the full truth surfaced. A child with no palace record and no official identity was easy to dismiss. Once he was inside palace control, the story could still be managed. Eugene saw the riders coming through the trees before anyone else did. He had been watching the road since dawn because he had been a rogue alpha long enough to know what the approach of uniformed men at speed usually meant. He stepped into the road. "Ashwick is a private settlement," he said, blocking their path with the particular stillness of a man who is not bluffing. "State your business." "Step aside," the lead guard said. By order of whom, exactly?" Eugene said. "Just because I see 5 men in Sterling colours and no royal seal on that letter you are holding." He had read it upside down from 12 feet away. "Which means someone sent you unofficially. Which means the king does not know you are here." The guard hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Eugene did not start the fight, but he finished it. And when the dust settled, 3 guards were on the ground, with non-fatal but persuasive injuries. One had retreated into the trees, and one was sitting against a fence post, reconsidering his career. Geoffrey arrived 20 minutes later to find Eugene in the road, slightly bloodied across the knuckles, watching the remaining guard from a comfortable distance. Geoffrey took in the scene. Then he looked at Eugene with the particular assessment of a king encountering a man who just handled a problem he himself was responsible for creating. "You are the rogue alpha," Geoffrey said. "You are the king who cast out his true Luna and then woke up 6 weeks later," Eugene replied. His tone was not cruel. It was just honest in the way of men who have no political career to protect. Geoffrey absorbed this without argument. "Where is she?" "In the house, with your son." Eugene stepped aside, then added quietly, "She has been good to him, better than anyone in your palace ever was to her." That landed. Geoffrey walked past him toward the house. Robert followed. Then he paused beside Eugene. "Thank you," he said simply. Eugene shrugged. "Ask me again when this is over." Jayna was standing in the doorway when Geoffrey reached the house. She had heard the commotion and had put Carl behind her with the steady certainty of a mother who has made her peace with standing between danger and someone she loves. She looked at Geoffrey. He looked at her. 6 weeks of broken things sat between them in the cool autumn air, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. Carl peered around Jayna's side at the tall, dark-haired man in plain clothes and studied him with 5-year-old frankness. Geoffrey's throat worked. "Is that—" "Yes," Jayna said. Her voice was level, not warm, not cold, clear. "He is." Geoffrey crouched down to Carl's level. He did not speak. He looked at the boy's face, the jaw he recognized as his own, the eyes that were Jayna's completely, and the rawness that had appeared on his face at Mrs. Neal's cottage became something else entirely. Something that had no name in a king's vocabulary, because kings are not generally taught the word for the feeling of looking at a son they were never told existed. Carl assessed him calmly. "You are very large," he said. Robert, at a distance, covered a sound that might have been a laugh. Geoffrey looked up at Jayna. "I am so." "Not here," Jayna said, quietly but firmly. "Not in front of him. Not before this is finished." She lifted her chin. "Take us home, Geoffrey. Do what is right. Then we can talk about everything else." He stood. He nodded. For the first time in a very long time, though Jeffrey Sterling did not argue or qualify or look for the diplomatic middle ground, he simply agreed. The Great Hall had seen many things in 3 centuries of Sterling rule. It had seen the crowning of kings and the signing of treaties and the formal declarations of war. It had witnessed celebrations that lasted 3 days and mournings that lasted longer. It had seen alliances formed and betrayals announced, and at least one legendary argument between 2 elder council members that had overturned 3 chairs and a table of refreshments. It had not seen anything quite like this. Jeffrey had called a full formal assembly. Every elder, every senior warrior, every pack noble of rank. The banners were up, the torches were lit. The hall was as it had been on the night of the ceremony 6 weeks ago, arranged with the same ceremonial weight. Jayna stood at the entrance to the hall, wearing the blue gown with the gold belt. Not the white lunar gown, not yet. And Carl stood beside her, his small hand in hers, dressed neatly and watching everything with the focused attention of a child who can feel the room's electricity, even without understanding its source. Robert had spent 48 hours preparing the documentation, every gap in the record, every date. Mrs. Neal's signed, witnessed testimony, the letter chain, the financial transfer that had been made to Mrs. Neal 5 years ago, traced through Martin's accounts. It was thorough. It was damning. It was the kind of evidence that leaves nothing to interpretation. Donald Martin arrived at the hall that evening, expecting a binding ceremony. Or he understood the situation the moment he saw Robert standing at the council table with a folder 3 inches thick and the expression of a man who has been waiting patiently for a very specific moment. Jeffrey opened the assembly. He stood at his throne, but he did not sit. He addressed the hall with the particular directness of a man who has decided that dignity now requires him to speak plainly rather than tactfully. What I say tonight, I say without revision and without defense of myself, he began. The hall was very still. 6 weeks ago, I stood in this room and committed an injustice against the Lunar of this pack and the woman who has been my most faithful partner in the building of this kingdom. I did it publicly, and so I correct it publicly. What I did not know at the time, was because I was either deceived or too proud to look for the truth, is that the injustice I committed was built on a foundation of deliberate lies. Robert read the documents aloud, all of them. He read the birth record gaps and the financial transfer, and Mrs. Neal's testimony. He read the dates that showed Cecilia's pregnancy. Timeline did not match what she had claimed when she first presented herself to Jeffrey. He read the correspondence between Cecilia and Donald Martin that outlined, in careful language, their arrangement. The hall processed all of it in the complete silence of people who are trying to reorder a narrative they thought they understood. Cecilia, standing to the side of the dais in the crimson gown that had felt so triumphant 6 weeks ago, had gone very still. She tried once. My lord, the records are incomplete, though they cannot be taken as Cecilia. Jeffrey said her name once, quietly, and she stopped. The tone did not require volume to carry authority. Donald Martin said nothing. He stood very straight with the practiced dignity of a man who would rather be executed with his posture intact than confess with it broken. But his face, that face of cool moral certainty, had lost its surety. He looked like a man watching a building he had constructed for decades take its first crack. Jeffrey nodded to Robert. Robert opened the hall doors. Jayna walked in. She walked in the way she had always walked, straight, unhurried, her eyes forward. But she was not wearing grief anymore. 6 weeks outside the palace had done something to her that years of loyalty inside it could not. She had been stripped down to the essential version of herself, and the essential version of Jayna Sterling was considerable. Carl walked beside her, his hand still in hers, and the resemblance, in a hall full of people who had known Jeffrey his entire life, was unmistakable. Heads turned, Elders leaned forward. The silence shifted from processing into something closer to recognition. Geoffrey stepped down from the dais. He did not make a speech about it. He simply walked down the steps until he was standing on the hall floor like everyone else. And then he did something that 3 centuries of Sterling kings had never done in the history of that particular room. He knelt. One knee to the stone floor, his dark head lowered. "I was wrong," he said. His voice carried through the hall clearly, no theatre in it. Not because I was deceived, though I was, but because I had been looking away from the truth long before the deception began. I chose convenience over loyalty. I chose political performance over the woman who deserved my absolute trust. I stripped you of your title before this court, and I restore it before this court, not as a gesture, as a correction. He looked up at her. "Come home, Jayna, if you will." The if mattered. The room understood that the if mattered. Jayna stood before the kneeling king for a long moment. She looked at him with the steady, clear eyes of a woman who has survived being broken and rebuilt herself from the inside out, and now knows precisely what she is worth. "Stand up, Geoffrey," she said. "Kings kneel once for the truth. They do not kneel forever, but they do not forget it either." He stood. She held out her free hand. He took it. Carl, between them, looked at the tall man and then at Jayna, and then back at the tall man with 5-year-old practicality. "Are we going to the big house now?" he asked. "Yes," Jayna said. "We are going home." The hall exhaled. It was not applause. It was something older than applause. The sound a room makes when it recognizes that something correct has finally happened. Cecilia was escorted from the palace grounds the same evening. She left without ceremony, which was a particular kind of justice, given how much she had invested in ceremony. The court charges against her, fraud, manipulation of palace records, and conspiracy against the reigning Luna, were formally filed by Robert before midnight. Her pregnancy, real though it was, carried no political claim on the Sterling throne. Her child would be provided for materially. The child was not responsible for what the mother had done, but Cecilia herself would face the council's judgment in the weeks ahead, and the council, stiffened by embarrassment, would not be lenient. Donald Martin resigned from the Elder Council before Geoffrey could formally remove him, which everyone understood was his final exercise of control. He spent his resignation statement declaring that he had acted in what he believed were the best interests of the pack. He was not wrong that he believed this. He was wrong about what the best interests of a pack actually were. He retired to his family estate and was not heard from at council level again. History does not remember him kindly. Mrs. Neal was brought before the council and confessed fully and formally. Her punishment was exile from the Sterling territory for 2 years, stern but not merciless, given the full weight of what she had been coerced into, and the fact that her confession had been the hinge everything turned on. Jayna had been asked her recommendation before the council voted, and Jayna had said, "She was afraid. Fear is not an excuse, but it is an explanation. Let the exile be the lesson." The council voted accordingly. Robert was elevated to the rank of First Advisor, a title that had not been used in the Sterling pack for 40 years. He accepted it with characteristic dryness, saying only that he hoped the position came with fewer archival surprises than his previous role. Eugene, who had accompanied Jayna back to the palace at her request, and had been the subject of considerable nervous attention from the palace guard upon arrival, was received by Geoffrey in a private meeting. What was said between those 2 men remained private. What was established publicly was that Eugene of the Outer Woods was granted free passage through Sterling territory, and that a formal letter of alliance would be drafted between his independent settlement and the Sterling pack. Eugene accepted this and shook Geoffrey's hand with the grip of a man who is willing to respect someone who has earned it. As he was leaving the palace courtyard, a pack house he had entered voluntarily for the first and likely last time, Jayna appeared at the courtyard gate. "You did not have to come back with me," she said. "No," he agreed. Yes, but Carl asked me to make sure there were no more wolves in the road. A pause. He is a very direct child. She smiled. He is. Eugene looked at her for a moment, the expression he had learned to keep contained, still contained, but present. Are you well, Jayna? I will be, she said. I think for the first time in a long time. I actually will be. He nodded, mounted, and rode back into the woods without looking back, because he was the kind of man who knew when a story was not his. Carl was given rooms in the royal wing and introduced, formally and publicly, as Carl Sterling, firstborn son of Alpha King Geoffrey and Luna Jayna, rightful heir to the Sterling throne. He received this information with the same calm practicality he brought to everything, asked if he could keep the dog he had made friends with at the Ashwick cottage, and accepted the answer, "We will find you a better one," with reasonable grace. Geoffrey and Jayna did not fall back into each other immediately. That would have been the wrong story, and they both knew it. Trust does not rebuild itself in the same shape it was before. It rebuilds differently, more carefully, with more visible seams, less perfect, but in many ways stronger for the transparency. They spent evenings together at first with Carl between them, which was both its own small joy and a natural arrangement of priorities. Jayna did not pretend the hurt was gone, because it was not gone. Geoffrey did not pretend the apology was sufficient, because he knew it was not. What they built in the weeks and months that followed was something more honest than what they had before. Less about performance and more about the daily, deliberate choice to stay. One night, very late, long after Carl was asleep and the palace had gone quiet, Geoffrey came to the study where Jayna was reading. He sat down across from her without speaking. She looked at him over the top of her book. "I am not asking you to forgive me tonight," he said. "I know it is not tonight." "No," she agreed. "It is not tonight." "But I am asking—" He stopped, started again. "I am asking to be the person who stays, Jayna, not the person who is forgiven, the person who is present, every day, for however long it takes." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the man who had walked to her across a gathering of 30 women with simple, certain eyes. She thought about 6 years of being loved imperfectly but genuinely. She thought about what it would mean to let bitterness be the last word when she had survived so much to get here. She thought about Carl asleep in his room, the living proof that some things survive even the worst choices of the people responsible for them. "Put the fire on," she said. "Stay then." He put the fire on. He stayed. It was not a perfect ending. It was a true one. And for a story built on the ruins of lies, truth was the only ending that was ever going to hold. If your heart has been in this story from the very beginning, this is the moment to stand with us. Do not watch quietly and disappear. Subscribe if you believe stories like this deserve to keep coming. Like this video if Jayna's rise was worth the wait. And in the comments, tell me one word for Geoffrey Sterling. After everything he did, and everything it cost him to learn the truth. Your support keeps this channel alive, and I mean that sincerely. Every story worth telling leaves something behind that is bigger than itself. This one is no different. The first lesson is about silence. Silence is not the same as safety. Mrs. Neal held her secret for 5 years under the belief that staying quiet was the safest choice. For herself, for the pack, for the system. What she actually did was allow an injustice to compound. Silence protects the wrong thing when the thing being protected is a lie. There is always a cost to speaking truth. But the cost of not speaking it, as Mrs. Neal learned, collects interest. The second lesson is about tradition. Donald Martin was not a villain who knew he was villainous. He was a man who had decided long ago that the survival of a structure mattered more than the people inside it. Tradition, custom, and order are powerful and important. But the moment they are used to justify cruelty to individuals, they have been corrupted. Rules that cannot be questioned are not wisdom. They are control wearing the mask of wisdom. The third lesson is about what pride costs. Jayna Sterling was not a cruel man. He was a proud one. Pride and cruelty can produce the same damage. The difference is that pride often does not notice the damage it creates until the evidence is impossible to avoid. Jeffrey's arrogance did not make him malicious. It made him inattentive at the worst possible time. Inattention, when it is a choice made by someone with power, is its own form of harm. The fourth lesson is about love and labor. The kind of love that restores what it broke is not romantic. It is not a grand gesture on a ceremonial floor. It is the daily, unglamorous work of being present and accountable and patient enough to understand that trust is built in small, consistent actions, not announced in one evening. Jeffrey's kneeling was the beginning, not the resolution. And that distinction matters deeply. The fifth lesson belongs to Jayna. She survived 6 years of slowly accumulating invisibility, the quiet erosion of being seen as a function rather than a person, by keeping something essential intact inside herself. She did not become bitter in the woods. She did not let the exile define her. She found her son and stood in the road of whatever came next without flinching. Women who carry pain with grace are often mistaken for women who have accepted being treated poorly. They are not the same thing. Grace under pressure is not agreement. It is the discipline to survive long enough for truth to arrive. And the final lesson, which belongs to all of them together. The strongest kingdoms are not built on airs. They are built on honesty. Any institution, a pack, a family, a company, or a relationship that requires people to keep painful secrets in order to hold itself together is not strong. It is fragile in the particular way of things that look solid because they have never been tested. The test always comes, and what survives the test is not the performance of strength, but the genuine article, accountability, clarity, and the courage to say the true thing before the cost of not saying it destroys everything. Some betrayals destroy a woman, and some reveal the queen that people were foolish enough not to recognize when she was still standing quietly in front of them. Jayna did not win because life became kind to her. She won because truth survived long enough to be spoken, because love did not die even when it was handled carelessly, and because in the end, not every person in that kingdom was forced to face the weight of what they had done. Stories like this remind us that dignity can be buried, but not erased. That power without honor eventually collapses under its own weight, and that sometimes the most satisfying ending is not revenge alone, but rightful restoration. Thank you for watching, for feeling every moment of this with us, for being part of this growing family. The next story will begin where silence ends, where loyalty is tested, and where another heart will be pushed to the edge before fate answers back. We will see you in the next video.